Well, thank you everyone for being here this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. So today we will have the National Time Transfer Accounts Part A. We have three presentations. We have Nicole Lay and Tim Miller, Gender Difference in Market and Household Work over the Life Cycle. You will go first. Then we have Marina Sanella, Alessandra De Rose, Couples, Genders, Differences in Subjective Wellbeing During Parenting Time. And finally, we'll have Ruben Mutegi, Moses Muritis, Germano Babu, and Paid Work and Schooling Inequalities, Profiles by Gender and Age in Selected African Countries. And we will have two discussants at the end of the session, Vladimir Kozlov and Guadalupe Surneves. So, well, thanks everyone for being here. I guess you're all now used to how we are doing these presentations. So each presenter will have 15 minutes to present, and then we'll have 5 minutes for each discussion and questions and answers at the end if we have enough time. So I'll let you know when time is over, when you have 5 minutes left, and then when time is over. So please, Nicole and Tim, thanks for being in this session.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole.
Hi and aloha. I'm Tim.
Yes, aloha. Today, Tim and I is going to present gender differences in work using evidence from 43 countries. So our main question for today is, how do societies differ in organizing work by gender? And we have 43 countries. So from all the regions around the world, from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, Caribbean, and North America as well. So it's all regions.
Okay, so this is thanks to the hard work of many people. So we're building a database compiling information from several different sources: Counting Women's Work Project, the Agenda Project, UN Stats Division, OECD, and ILO. And we currently have 43, oh, and yes, thanks to everyone. We currently have 43 countries in our database, and we're expecting to add another 20 shortly, so we'll be up to 60 plus.
Yes. So in answering our main questions today, how do society differ in organizing work by gender? We can look at 3 dimensions. So we can look at the amount of work, how much they do, another type of work, what type of work we are talking about, and the age pattern of work. So, but today we're only going to focus on looking at the first 2 dimensions, the amount of work and the type of work.
Okay, so here we're looking at just one country in the database, Costa Rica. And we see here that people work an average of 41 hours per week in both market and unpaid care work.
And unpaid care work here includes both the household unpaid work, cleaning, food preparation, and include also care work. So you take care of children at home, or you take care of your elderly parents in another household. It includes here too. So it's all included, unpaid household and care work.
So before we show you the next slide, you all can use your imagination and think about what the 42 other countries are going to look like when we display them on this graph. So again, we're looking at hours worked per week. It's total hours, including market and unpaid care work. What will that look like across all these countries classified by GDP per capita? So you can reflect on that a second, and then
ta-da, here it is. So let's look at this graph. In all these 43 countries, on average, people work about 41 hours per week for both market and unpaid care work combined. So we can look at it scattered all over across the GDP per capita level. So on the far end, the high level, we see Belgium, Germany, United States, France, all surrounding the 41. And on the other hand, we have Ghana, El Salvador, a little bit more than 40, Senegal, Honduras. So on average, it's about 41 hours per week. Now, this is for both gender, men and women combined. So let's think about what if we separate them into female and male, women and men.
Okay, so here again, we're just using the example of Costa Rica. And we see here that women in Costa Rica work on average 42 hours per week, and men work less than that, 40 hours per week. And so, yes.
42,
So
I work a lot more than 42 for combined.
okay, so you can think, yes, so we can imagine how each of us work and make some sort of assumptions about that. And we'll show you in a second what this looks like for the other 42 countries around the world, again, classified by GDP per capita. So in your minds, just think a little bit about how you think this is going to look across the world.
Ta-da, here again. So we do not label country now, but just look at the red dots. Red dots represent the women around the world that across the income GDP per capita, and a man in the blue dots. So for women, on average, across the 43 countries, on average is about 43 hours per week work combined. And for men, it's about 39 hours per week work. So that makes women work a little bit more, maybe 4 hours more per week.
Yeah, so I think what we've done now is we've taken this data and just represented it by looking at the gap. So we're just taking the number of hours worked by women and then subtracting the number of hours worked per men to get a gender gap in the total amount of work per week.
Yeah, here is what Tim talked about. So if we take woman minus man, we look at the gender gap here. Gender gap in hours worked per week show and the GDP per capita, and we do have on average about 4.4 hours per week. So we can see Finland, Sweden, Australia, Belgium on the high-end GDP per capita here. And then we also see it's all cluttered around about the same. We don't really see a clear pattern yet right now. It's all over the place. Jim, you want to add about this?
Yeah, so I think the main message here is we're not seeing a very strong patterning by GDP per capita. Of course, we've only got 43 countries in there. Things will become a little bit more convincing as we add countries. But in general, we're seeing that this gap, this gender gap, is maintained across all income levels.
Okay, next, we're going to look at the second dimension. We're going to look at the type of work.
Okay, so again, using the example of Costa Rica, we're looking at unpaid care work, the number of hours in unpaid care work each week as a percentage of total work during the week. And so we see here that in Costa Rica, about half, a little bit more than half, 53% of all the hours worked are worked in unpaid care. And so again, we're going to do that same game again that we've been playing. Imagine what the other countries look like in your mind's eye, and then we'll show you in a second what this looks like.
Would higher income country has lower portion of unpaid work? Lower income country has higher unpaid work proportion? Let's see. So again, here, on average, it's about 49% across all the countries here. So for the higher income level, we see a lot of more clustering around the 50% group: Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, United Kingdom, USA, Canada, it's all around. And on the other end, at the lower GDP per capita, we see more widespread. We have Vietnam, Laos, El Salvador close to the mean, and then the other we have a little bit of divergence here. So this is unpaid care work as percentage of total work.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, but just one thing to mention, I think that to me, the interesting thing about this is that half the work we do is in unpaid care work.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah, right. To me, so that is, it's really interesting to think about, because like when we use the term work, just colloquially, people think about like going to work, like market work. It's associated with market work. And yet the reality is that, well, look at the line here, and the median is like 50%. So at least in half of our countries around the world, unpaid care work is the main form of work, not market work.
Exactly. And
Okay.
if we think about this and split it into female and male, means woman and man, how would that look like?
Okay, so here again, Costa Rica as the example. Now, we're not picking on Costa Rica. We just picked Costa Rica because it was in the center. So like the dots line up right in the center of the graph. So here we see the strong segregation of work in Costa Rica. For women, 73% of their work time is spent in unpaid care work. And for men, that proportion is 32%. So we see a strong segregation of work, the types of work in Costa Rica. And now, once again, we'll play the same game. Imagine now what it's going to look like in the other countries.
5 more minutes, please.
Okay, so unpaid care work is about 64% on average, shown by the red dots. So women work about around 2/3 of their work, represented by unpaid care work. While for the men, the blue dots is about 1/3 of their total work belongs to unpaid care work. So if we look at the blue dots, the red dots is about the same, around the 64%. But if we look at the blue dots, we can clearly see a little bit of uptrend along the GDP income level.
Yeah, so if we re-express this graph, so we're going to do the same thing we did before, which we're going to just look at the gender gap. So we're looking at the percent of time spent in unpaid care work by women, and subtracting from that the percent of time spent in unpaid care work by men. We'll look at the gender gap now in the next figure.
Now, then we can see the gender gap in unpaid care work as a percentage of total work, women minus men. Then we can see clearly here that the gap a little bit narrower at the high income level. The GDP per capita high level, the gap is lower as compared to the low GDP per capita income level. So in conclusion, looking at the dimension of amount of work, in 39 of the 43 countries we see, women work more than men, and on average, 4 hours more per week. And this gender gap persists across income levels.
And in looking at the second dimension of how societies differ in their organization of work by gender, the segregation of work, well, we first note that unpaid care work accounts for half of all work, and then we note the strong segregation of unpaid care work by gender. So for women, about 2/3 of their work time is spent in unpaid care work, and for men, it's about 1/3. But we also note that at higher levels of GDP per capita, men's share of unpaid care work increases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim and Nicole. That was a great presentation. Now we'll give the floor to Marina Zanella and Alessandra De Rose for couples gender differences in subjective well-being during parenting time.
Okay, so as mentioned, this is a joint work with Alessandra De Rose, and we want to examine the subjective well-being of Italian mothers and fathers in child caregiving based on time use data. So why and what is our motivation for this study? Well, there is an extensive body of literature showing the emergence during the last decades of intensive parenting, that is higher amounts of time, as well more diversified time spent by parents with their children as compared to the past. So while there is a positive association between intensive parenting and the well-being of children is demonstrated, less is known on the effects on the well-being of parents that might feel more under pressure. Indeed, a number of studies have demonstrated the existence of lower levels of subjective well-being among parents compared to childless people, but fewer studies have examined this relation between doing childcare and the well-being of parents. And those studies led to different conclusions. From one side, a body of literature has used the suggestion that women enjoy childcare giving more than men as an explanation for the slowdown in the gender revolution. But recently, a number of the new studies, mostly based on the US, found that fathers enjoy childcare giving more than mothers. So here, our aim is to analyze gender differences in levels of subjective well-being associated to childcare activities in Italian couples. In fact, as I said, there is a shortage of studies on Europe, and this is mostly due to data availability. So we want to examine overall childcare time, but also, ideally, a number of detailed activities, including routine childcare that we define as physical care, feeding the child, bathing the child, but also supervisory childcare, recreational childcare activities like playing with the child, reading to the child, and so on, educational childcare activities, and travel-related childcare activities. So we use microdata from the latest time use surveys available for Italy for year 2013. Here you can see an example of the time diary used to collect the time data. So the respondents are asked every 10 minutes to report on their primary activity, eventually a secondary activity, if they were alone or not, and how pleasant was the moment. In particular, they are asked to score each activity from -3, very unpleasant, to 3, very pleasant. So our target population consists of 3,261 heterosexual couples with fathers and mothers of children aged up to 14 years. Those parents performed more than 20,000 childcare episodes that represent our sample. Actually, the great majority of those childcare episodes were performed by mothers, about 70%. So not only mothers and fathers differ with regard to the amount of time devoted to childcare, but also with regard to the kind of activity performed, to the kind of task performed. In fact, while recreational childcare activities represent the majority of fathers' time, the most frequent activity for mothers is routine childcare. In this graph, you can see simple estimates of the amount of childcare time spent together with the partner. So as you can see, the share of solo time, that is the time in which the parents can be considered as fully responsible for the child because it's alone without the partner, is lower for fathers compared to mothers. If we look at routine child care activities, we can see that almost virtually half of the time was spent together with the partner, which means that father's time is somehow not substituting for mother's time. Another characteristic is the amount of time spent doing childcare together with another activity. So most of the childcare time for both parents is single tasking. But when we look at the detailed composition of multitasking episodes, as you can see, we can observe relevant differences between genders. In fact, mothers, they combine more often than fathers housework with childcare activities. If you look at recreational childcare time of mothers, 33% of the episodes were done together with housework, while the figure lowers to 11% for fathers. So we believe that all those differences in the nature of childcare activities are reflected also in the subjective experience of parenting time. So to study the subjective well-being of parents in doing childcare, we rely on these enjoyment scores. And in particular, we follow a common approach in literature that is to build an unpleasantness indicator, also known as U-index. So the U-index is equal to 1 when the activity is not pleasant or unpleasant. And this happens when the episode has a score below the 25th percentile of the scores assigned to the corresponding activity. So we use the U-index as dependent variable in our regression analysis. We run 3 models for overall childcare, routine childcare, and recreational activities, while unfortunately, due to the small sample size, we were not able to analyze educational and travel-related childcare. So our explicative variables are gender, multitasking, and the co-presence of the partner. And in particular, we want to study the interaction of gender with those 2 variables. Our definition of multitasking includes only the combination of unpaid work with childcare, with unpaid work. We have a number of control variables for the characteristics of the episode, of the individual, and of the household. But here, so you can see our result for the model related to overall childcare time. So as you can see, in line with previous studies, we find fathers to enjoy childcare more than mothers. Multitasking lowers the enjoyment of mothers in doing childcare, but not that of fathers, while the co-presence of the partner has a positive effect on the well-being of both parents. Looking at routine childcare, we can see that there is no significant gender difference in levels of enjoyment for this activity, but multitasking has a negative effect on the well-being of both parents, while we do not observe any relevant effect of the co-presence of the partner. Finally, as regards recreational childcare activities, once again, we observe fathers to enjoy recreational childcare time more than mother. Multitasking lowers the well-being of both parents, while the co-presence of the partner has a positive effect on the well-being only for mothers. So to sum up, compared to fathering, mothering involves not only more overall time commitment, but also more multitasking, more physical labor, more time alone with children, and more overall responsibility. These differences in the quantity and as well as in the nature of childcare time are reflected in the subjective experience of parenting time of men and women, with mothers reporting lower levels of enjoyment of overall childcare time compared to fathers. A result that I would like to stress is the result related to multitasking. So multitasking significantly decreased the well-being of both parents in childcare giving. In this perspective, women suffer from a greater disadvantage as compared to men, since they do multitask more housework and childcare than fathers. And we also, considering multitasking activities, considering secondary childcare time, what we observe is that this enlarge the gender gap in unpaid work if we do consider also secondary time use. So next steps of this research, we want to experiment alternative definitions of multitasking, but especially alternative definitions of childcare activities. And I'm working on trying a way to measure really the differences inside in subjective well-being between men and women inside the couple. So to find one measure to summarize those differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you very much. You guys have been very careful with time, so thank you for that part. And our last talk for today is unpaid work and schooling inequalities, profiles by gender and age in selected African countries. Please go ahead.
Okay, this is Ruben from Kenya. I'm presenting our paper for the Kenyan team, which is comprised of Moses Muredi and Njamano Mwabo. Our paper is on unpaid work and educational inequalities, profiles by gender, and age in selected African countries. I will start by sharing with you some of the photos that shows the nature of unpaid work in African countries. And this one is the children who are fetching water. You can see they are very young, who are school-age going children. This is how they do the fetching of water in some of African countries. The other one is children who are now transporting water, carrying them on their hands. In some countries, they travel for as long as 6 kilometers, 5 kilometers in search for water. The other one is children who are carrying firewood from forests. And also the other one is children also with their mothers who are also carrying firewood from the forest. And also, as I said, on the issue of water, some travel like 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers in search for firewood. Therefore, given the background of those photos that I've shown, we developed some interest of finding out whether this unpaid work, especially for children, has any effect in their schooling. And guided by some of the studies which were carried before, which particularly focused on paid work, and the work of Jason, Nissel, Lee, 2000. These studies mostly focused on the paid work and largely ignored the aspect of the unpaid work. So that's why we want to find out whether this unpaid work leads to inequality in terms of access to education by gender and age in selected African countries. So these are the questions that we trying to answer in our paper, whether there is any significant difference in unpaid work by gender among the African countries, the unpaid work, the source of gender inequality in education participation, and also what policies can close the gender gap in schooling due to unpaid work. Obviously, we used the methodology of NTTA by range and also largely improved by Donewa 2014, which includes 4 steps. One step, the first step is identification of the unpaid time allocation from the household survey, and then identification of the unpaid activities which are not included in the GDP, and also imputation of that on monetary value to unpaid work, and finally estimation of the NTTA age profiles. In our case, since we are not interested on monetary value of the unpaid work, our interest was on the first 2 steps, which involves identifying the unpaid time allocation in the household survey, and also identifying the activities of unpaid work from such survey. So we used data for 4 countries in Africa to enable us to do comparison. We have Ethiopia, Tanzania, Malawi, and Uganda. And the surveys are from the year 2011 to 2014. And the sample size for those surveys, they range from 3,200 to 4,000 households. And this data is from a Living Standards Measurement Survey. These are nationally representative kind of data, which are carried out by the national statistics offices in those countries. And so what was common in these surveys in terms of our interest on unpaid work, the 2 variables which are already shown before, that is water and fetching firewood, they were so common. And therefore we picked on those 2 variables because they could allow us to do a comparison on unpaid work and housing activities. So the results are as follows. We have given a few cases like Malawi, where we show the economic activities, and we are seeing that unpaid household labor constitute like 61% of the population participate in that. For Malawi, we are comparing the wage labor and unpaid household labor as shown here. So this is wage employment. The blue line the bar represent men, and the other one represent women. So you can see in unpaid wage or in wage employment, we have more men participating compared to women. But when it comes to unpaid household activities, we have more women participating compared to men. So that's an indication that most of women in African countries are highly involved in unpaid household activities. Same case to Tanzania. When you compare both male and female, we can see that unpaid family work, we have more female participating compared to men. And this one is a comparison of all those other activities. Actually, this one is by occupation, by gender. Okay, when it comes to now the profiles for the amount of time spent in carrying or fetching water or firewood, we have the profiles here. So that one shows the male firewood. Our focus is shown by this line here, which is drawing down the ones, pointing at 20. Since we want to demonstrate how this one affects education, so in Africa, mostly this is the school age going population. So you can see for males, they spend like an hour in a day in collecting firewood. That is in Malawi. But you see, for the female, there's a huge, they spend as high as 3 hours in fetching firewood. And for girls, they say they spend on average 2.5 hours when fetching water. No, firewood, sorry. When it comes to the water, this represents the male. They spend as high as 2 hours, those of age below 20. And for the females, they spend as high as 3 hours in fetching water. So generally what you can see in Malawi is that girls, now referring to those of age 5 to 20, which is the school age going population, girls spend more hours in fetching water and fetching firewood compared to boys. This is replicated in Ethiopia, where we can see boys of the age up to 20, they spend like 1 hour in a day collecting water. For the girls, they go as high as 1.5 hours in a day. For the firewood, we can see they spend like almost 2 hours per day to fetch firewood. And also for the female, in terms of the firewood, those of less than 20 years, they spend like 2 hours in a day in collecting firewood. Generally, what you can see again in Ethiopia is that we have more girls spending more time in collecting water and firewood compared to the boys. Uganda, we have the similar case in terms of the profiles. The boys or the males spending like 2 hours in a day fetching firewood. Then we have the female spending like 2.5 hours in a day firewood. We have for the water, we have the male spending like 6 hours, and the girls spend like 6 hours, and the male spending like 5 hours in fetching water, which mimics what happens in the 2 countries that have earlier shown. Again, in Tanzania, we see almost a similar trend. If we are focusing from age 0 to 20, that is for female firewood, like 1.5 hours per day in fetching firewood. For the males, they spend like half an hour in a day in fetching firewood. Then we have the female spending like almost 2 hours in fetching water, and the males spending like almost 1 hour in fetching water in a day. So unlike other countries that I've shown before, that is Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, Uganda. So Tanzania, at least, they spend less hours compared to others, but the profiles show that the girls spend more time in fetching water and the firewood compared to the boys. So the question now is, what is the implication of this when it comes to the schooling? So
Ruben, you have 5 more minutes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. So for the Uganda, all of them, there was this question which was asking them, they give the reasons for not attending school, and we picked on this reason for getting involved in unpaid work. And in Uganda, we can see that 90% of children are not able to access education because they are involved in unpaid work activities at home. The situation is worse in Malawi, where we have like 26% of the children who don't attend school because of getting involved in unpaid work activities. And in Ethiopia, we have 19% of children, school-age going children of age 0 to 20, who are not able to attend school because of unpaid work activities. Of course, there are other reasons as to why they don't attend school, but we particularly focused more on the unpaid work, just because, as I said earlier, that the early activities, they were focusing more, other studies focused more in the paid work. So what we conclude from our results, it is quite consistent, or there's evidence that African women spend much more time than men in search for water and firewood in all the countries. And in that point that I've given, we can say that it's more or less like it is quite consistent that girls spend much more time than boys in search for water and firewood. We also find that affordable access to water and firewood is still a nightmare in many African countries, especially in the 21st century. If children can spend like 6 hours in fetching water instead of going to school. We also say that we find further that indicates that time is spent on water and firewood collection at the expense of schooling, just like I've just demonstrated, and especially more particularly by girls. And therefore, we argue that the allocation of the release of time spent on household chores for the market and the schooling, which is currently in excess of 30 minutes, would increase the household well-being and reduce schooling inequalities. Therefore, there should be some policies in the countries where we are presenting this work in terms of ensuring that there is available energy, there is available water, In that way, they will reduce the amount of hours and time which is spent by girls and boys in search for those kind of activities. And in that case, will increase the access to education. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for these great presentations. I will now give the word to Vladimir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the speakers for such great presentations. It was very interesting. And generally, I will just start with the presentation with the first one, the presentation by Nicole and by team. So yeah, it was very interesting. And generally, I should say that most of my comments were somehow connected with the paper itself, because it looks like that you used very interesting and very promising approach generally. And within this approach, for example, you use the life expectancy also. And in this case, for example, it's interesting to decompose the situation with this gap. Something like, is it somehow explained by the gap in life expectancy? For example, men die younger, and in this case, it could somehow influence this gap. And on the other hand, it could be influenced by the gap that you already presented, the situations that unpaid work is in most cases done by women. So, but generally, there was also a very interesting picture from your text actually, and it's a pity that it wasn't on the slide, but it was very interesting because it matched perfectly the paper by Alessandra and Marina actually, because it was a very interesting situation with the time span with the life circle. Yeah, because you see that in the very active reproductive age, the gap was the highest among men and women. Yes, and generally it goes in line with this situation that women are generally more involved in multitasking, and so it could be a very nice bridge. And it is very interesting that it is observed in all the countries in the world. And well, you can say that it's common wisdom, but generally still, even if it is visualized, it looks very nice. Then generally another question with the harmonization. I didn't see it in the very beginning, but it looks like that you still worked with the countries that used the surveys conducted in different years and maybe in different methodologies. All methodologies were the same. And the same is with the years. What was the period? What was the period when you observe the samples and the surveys? Was it within 3 years or maybe 2 years, something like this, or maybe within 5 years? It looks like that I missed this information, and that's all. And sorry, should I address all the questions for all the presenters right now?
No, we'll do the questions and answers at the end, I guess.
Okay. So in this case, for Nicole, I'm expecting the answers.
Hi. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so for your first question about the harmonization of the method, right? Yeah, we are using a harmonized data from Gretchen, 10 countries, and also from Agenda, and also Agenda has about 20 countries. And also we are using also from the UNSD SDG indicator 5.4.7. That's also about the hours of unpaid, and also the harmonized data pay hours from ILO. So this data set, they harmonize their survey. We are just using their final products. Of course, you have a good point that if I merge 3 different data sets, whether these 3 data sets talk to each other, that I haven't seen any problem with that, but I would check again. That is a good point because they harmonize using the time use survey and they use the same definition for the United Nations standard payout, how to classify the unpaid hours, the standard time used by the United Nations manual. So it's about the same definition. So I thought it should be okay. Regarding the year, so we are using the latest available year, whatever survey that they have. And then we use, what we try to harmonize the comparison across 43 countries is we use the same life expectancy across all countries to compute this. So we use the more developed region female life expectancy. And then we calculate for the whole life cycle before we compute the hours per week. That's the way we do to harmonize it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tim, you want to add more? Tim will have some more to add.
That was great.
No?
Okay, great, thank you. So, well, I will now give the word to Guadalupe. So,
hi, hello, everybody. First of all, I congratulate all the participants, all the presenters for these nice presentations, because the first thing is that I learned a lot with the three of them. The first one, it was expected but shock at the same time to see all those different so ordered, because also I'm Spanish and I see Spain in the podium of the gender gap together with Italy, Marina, so we share that. And this is very related also with the paper that Marina presented, and I want to comment some about that. First of all, Marina, I want to thank you because you introduced for me a new dimension of the analysis of the data of the time use, because I'm used to look only at quantities, but not at the quality or in qualitative terms about that time, the difference, the gender difference between men and women. So for me, this is really new, and I know about other works that deal with this before, so thank you for that. And for me, your results, I think, are not surprised at all. So I understand that fathers enjoy more childcare activities and with time with children, and basically the reasons may be those that you find you check in your work: multitasking, without the presence of the partner. But maybe the first one, the most important, is the quantity. So fathers can enjoy more childcare activities because they do less. So it's like the saying goes, good things come in small packages, maybe something like that. See, if you have to do a lot of work, you cannot enjoy it as the same, in the same way. So for me, it would be really interesting comparing your results with other countries with a less gender gap, a lower gender gap, because Italy, like Spain, you see in the presentation of Nicole and Tim, that they have the highest gender gap. So I would like to know if these huge differences in well-being, subjective well-being, are also present in other countries where these gender gaps are much lower. For me, it would be a good extension of the work. And that's all for my side. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Thank you to all the presenters, and thank you to everyone. So I just wanted to point out that this was a very interesting session, that we have a global point of view from Tim and Nicole's presentation. Then we have a particular case for Italy, as Marina presented. And then we have Malawi's case that shows how time use is so very different across countries and depending on the economies. And actually, that's one of my comments for Tim and Nicole's paper. your final conclusion and the idea that more developed countries have a lower gender gap, but it's also correlated to development level and also correlated to probably the demographic transition as well. So if you could control by the size of family size or something like that and development level other than GDP, maybe we could have a better idea or a cleaner idea on this gender gap and how it evolves, because it's very endogenous. As we saw in the Malawi case, many people have to spend time fetching water or finding wood, but it doesn't happen in Northern Europe, right? Or not even in South America. So I think there's a huge indigeneity in your case that I would like to control for, because it's a very interesting cross-country exercise. And just to mention, there's one very interesting comment made by Maristela, and she was pointing out that many women consider spending time with their own children as leisure. So I just wanted to ask the two last presenters, since you were working with time use surveys, if you could explain how childcare is measured and how leisure is measured, please.
Okay, may I also reply to the comments of Guadalupe?
Sure, please do. Go ahead.
Many thanks for the comments, first of all. So indeed, I really like very much your point that yes, there are differences also in the type, in the nature of activities performed, but still the main difference is the amount of time you spend in an activity that might make it more or less enjoyable. So this I totally agree, but my point with this paper is that the differences in the nature, not only in the quantity, but in the nature, they add to the already existing differences in the amounts of time, and that we should consider also this aspect. Also, to me, is very important in general measure of, in this case, we can talk of gender equity, should also not only include objective aspects, but also the subjective experience of people, because this is also very important to me. And regarding the comparison, yes, I'm totally searching for someone who wants to work on comparing this well-being time use data. It's really something I would love to do, but the problem is that there is really this well-being information is not available for all countries. For example, the well-being module is available for the United States, but it's a bit different from our information. At the European level, as I know, only UK and France have this kind of information. And also it's very new for Italy, and I'm not sure whether they will do it again, repeat this kind of information in the next round. That is actually this year we have we will have the time use survey. And also, I saw a comment from Miguel on couples. If I can briefly add something, yes, I'm trying to work on couples at the couple level, not at the individual level. So this work was at the individual level. And I'm adding information related to both individuals in the couple, including differences in the total amount of time used for certain activities, but also breadwinner arrangements. And also the very last thing I wanted to say to Maria, it's really this point, and also related to the last point of the chair of Piedad, this point that leisure is not considered this blurred, this thing that is, we are never sure if we should consider childcare activities or time with children. Time with children would include more diversified activities, including personal care. So parents, while they eat, they are with children, they are always somehow. But in fact, leisure, especially leisure time, is not considered as work. So there are a number of time use studies analyzing this relation between well-being, time with children, and also free time. And actually, those studies found that parents are happier when they are with the children as compared with not, even if this reduce personal leisure free time. So this is, and many thanks. Okay, thank you. I hope I didn't forget anything.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for our case on the aspect of how they measure the child care. Unfortunately, the survey data that we are using didn't have that variable because it's a living standard measurement survey. And in the module for labor, that's where they captured the two variables on the amount of time which is spent in fetching water and fetching firewood. And those are the two variables that we focused on. So not unless I check if there's a specific time use survey from those countries, then probably I can check on how they measure the child care. And many African countries, they don't have the time survey specifically. That's why Kenya is missing. I'm presenting from Kenya. Kenya should have been one of those countries, but we don't have an explicit survey on time use. But me and the Kenyan team, we pushed to with the Bureau of Statistics, and lucky enough, the next surveys that you'll be carrying out from next year, there will be a module now specifically on time use, which will be capturing all the unpaid work activities at home. In response to a question, someone is asking, that is Vadel, I don't know whether I have pronounced the name well, is asking whether there are some big differences between the time use or the time spent in those activities for the children in urban areas and in the rural areas. Definitely, there will be a huge difference because at least in urban areas, there's available energy and water at the closest level of the household. So they don't spend a lot of time in the two activities compared to the rural areas. But I'll take it as a concern. Of course, in the main paper, we'll do that analysis by urban rural so that you can be able to see whether there's a major difference between the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. Thank you for the questions and to all the presenters. Great presentations. And well, we're just right on time, so we just finished this session. Thank you, and we can open the mics and give a round of applause to everyone.